Okay, back with Ellen Brown. Jobless recovery. How can it be? Well, it can't. Greenspan says expect more unemployment. Jobless recovery. That is not possible. Unless it's a totally phony recovery.
That's true if they're putting the money in the wrong place. If they actually did put it out there, I mean, they're putting plenty of money out there, but they're putting it out, they're giving it to the bank.
Well, they're paying off their cronies. This is all the biggest theft in world history.
But if they put that money to productive use, if they started hiring some people, they could solve the problem.
If the banks started loaning money for capital startups and they stopped their absolutely fatal war against small business owners in this country. They don't want small business owners. They don't want them around. They want big box stores and just...
Well, that's why I think you need public banks, because public banks can take risks. One reason, I mean, your regular community banks that are even the honest ones, they still can't really afford to take a lot of risk in this environment. They're going to go under.
Well, here, hold on. I think you've said something. I can't prove this, but I do think a lot of local banks which have tried honestly and earnestly to serve the communities are pretty well tapped out. And I think
now the FDIC is going to hit them up with an extra assessment because the FDIC is broke. Well, where's that money going to come from? It's going to come out of their capital base, which means they can make even less loans.
Right.
So they really can't afford to go dabbling in these little startup companies.
Can't do it. Forget about it.
But who can is if you had state-owned banks, they can venture forth. I read this great article on...
Venture forth how, Ellen? With fractional banking?
Yeah, they can create credit on their books just like private banks do. But
we do Ellen and Jeff's savings and loan.
Yeah.
And we go on the books. We're state chartered.
No, I'm thinking of state-owned.
Oh.
If you're state-owned, you almost don't even have to worry about capital because, the reserve requirement is now obsolete. I mean, you can...
It's
every
for
bank
suckers,
knows how to
right?
get around it. They do these overnight sweeps, and in fact, somebody told me, an insider told me that the way they really do, or at least the way some banks really do, is that the reserve requirement you can always get around. So that it's just your capital requirement you have to worry about. They only pay attention to it every 3 months when they have to report to the regulator, and then they look to see if they've met their requirement, and if they haven't, then they sell some of their loans to their friendly neighbor banker who's not being audited or doesn't have to report it then. And then when the regulator goes away, they buy them back. So they just shuffle everything around so the books look good. So in other words, they create credit, all the credit they want whenever they want to their good customers. When their good corporate customer walks in and wants a loan, they say sure, and they write the loan. They don't check to see if they've got the money. They don't have the money. It's all credit on their books.
Well, they know that, of course. Yeah, everybody. It's not a big secret.
Yeah.
Right?
So a state-owned bank could do that. A state-owned bank can run circles around any private bank in terms of capital. Look at it, the amount of capital that California has. You've got all your real estate that's up and down the state, and then you've got all your revenues, and then all these funds. Capital is just the difference between assets and liabilities, and we have like a huge amount of assets, way more than any private bank would have. So they can basically create all the credit they want. And so they could fund all these little startup things, and they could afford to take some losses because they don't have these messed up books like the other banks do. They're starting fresh.
In lieu of what you're suggesting, it sounds to me like the scenario is terminal. How long can they continue to print money and pretend when the game is over?
You're talking about the private bank?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is over for them, and that's why we need to step up with some public banks. I read this great article on, it was called something like The Government Does Some Things Right or something, but it was about the development of the Internet. And the man who invented it, he tried to go to these private companies, and they just had no interest. Their computers were talking to themselves, within the business. But he said, no, you could get these computers to talk to each other all over the world. And they said, well, why would we want to do that? And it was too risky. They didn't see any profit in it, and they just didn't want to do it. So finally, he took to the Navy, and then they developed it. So the thing is, the government is a deep pocket. They can afford to take risks. They do stuff like pure research, whereas a private company has to worry about their profits and their shareholders all the time. So it's always profit-driven. It's not like, let's just do it to see if we can do it.
Wow. All right, so the future, is there a future at all for American small business entrepreneurs? Yes. If you've got your own startup capital, you can always do something. And there's always a market for a better product.
Right. There's many little businesses that would just be, if you could get the money out there, and the money is just credit. So set up some public banks that can create credit on their books and put limits on what they're allowed to fund, like call them green banks or whatever.
Sure.
So have them fund only productive
green banks.
things.
How do we get this done?
Well, they have a green bank thing going in Congress now. That might be the first.
Well, states' rights. We don't need the feds to do this, right?
Yeah, I agree. States are the place to start. If people understood, see, that's the problem. People don't really understand. If you tried to do an initiative and you walked into the supermarket and you'd say, would you like to sign this initiative for a state bank? They'll say, well, we got plenty of banks. What do we want another bank for?
They wouldn't understand you, right? Yeah. Yep. I wonder how many governors would sign such into law if a bill got through the legislature. There are a few out there that have courage.
Yeah. So the first thing I think is we've got to change public awareness. And then when you have that whole thing about the 100th monkey, when you have enough people who understand it.
Well, you need to keep pounding away on this in your articles.
Yeah, and you do too.
Well, you keep sending them. I'll keep posting them. Maybe somebody in one of the states will get onto this and come up with a bill. If you could write a template bill to be introduced in a state legislature somewhere.
Yeah, and
actually
that's what I'm doing right now, is trying to figure out exactly what you need to form a bank. I mean, a state bank is going to be different.
Now, this could be good, Ellen, good. This is good, because there are a lot of legitimate legislators in the states, and somebody in each state is going to grab this if you can come up with a basic premise that is in bill form or quasi-bill form. This is good. All right, hold on. Back in a minute.